Well, hello, everybody. I am so excited to have with me Cyndi Maxey. Cyndi is a speaker, a coach, an author, and she helps her clients design and deliver influential, impactful presentations. She's the co author of 6 books, and we're going to dive into talking about presentation skills here today. Cyndi, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Dean.
I'm excited to learn from you and hear about your story. And one of your books that you co authored is called Present Like a Pro. And I thought, what better place for our audience and for our conversation today than to jump into talking about presentation? And I am curious, in your experience, what are the things that separate the great presentations from the average presentation that people see on a day to day basis?
I think the number one thing is just an ability to be yourself and have a conversation similar to what we're having today, not needing to sound manipulative or in any way over practiced, but trusting the stories that you have. I think that ability is where you start.
Okay, well, let's talk about this over practiced because for a lot of people, as they move into the world of speaking, there's anxiety of being on stage and we want to feel prepared. We want to serve our audience. We want to have a preparation to it. Maybe we've been, working through Toastmasters experience, so we get that experience of preparing our message and having people staring at us while we're presenting. Um, what separates healthy presentation preparation from maybe less impactful preparation? Because I would imagine that you're not saying don't be prepared, but how do we differentiate between good preparation and maybe less effective preparation?
Well, I'll start by saying it's a speaker's right to have notes. Notes are okay. There is no reason why everything needs to be memorized and timed to the hilt. You never want to go overtime and keep that in mind in practicing. But I think if most speakers would just have some sort of note in front of them, maybe run through those notes, whatever's appropriate for the length of time. Usually I run through the opening at least 3 or 4 times, just standing up and practicing presenting with my laptop next to me in the room so I can kind of pretend that I have that. And I think those kinds of things, using notes, telling stories, being very confident of the opening, is really a great way to get the speaker moving toward being a great speaker and not just a mundane, and hi folks, uh, how are you doing today? Let's get started.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Notes, I think, are important, not written out word for word, but just
Hmm.
enough to give you an idea of where you're going. Oh yeah, here I'm going to talk about what my dog did that's so funny in this area. So that, and then I don't know that you need to practice with a group first, but imagining, looking at all parts of the group, imagining your mental self prepares what walking up to the front, and you kind of practice that in your mind. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk to the front. I'm going to tell this story. I'm going to look at my notes here. I'm not going to overuse my PowerPoint. That's bad, bad, bad. I think people are getting better at
Mm.
that. But now and then you'll see probably somebody coming out of academe who's just been told as a professor, this is what you do,
Mm.
which rarely works for an audience.
Hmm.
Are those
But
helpful?
yeah, so there's a couple things there. So the slide thing, I mean, that's a big thing, and I agree. I think people that are getting paid as speakers have come a long way and are using slides really as an enhancement for the message, but not a replacement. But the people that I've seen have the challenges either with an academic background or a corporate background where they've been used to really these sliduments, where the slide is a document that they're speaking to. And that creates some bad habits when they're asked to be on stage in front of 100 or 500 people. My my favorite is the disclaimer where they say, "Now I know you can't read this, but," it's like, oh boy, here we go. Then that slide should not have been there. But you said a couple of things that I really want to put a spotlight on. One is have your opening ready. I was thinking about a client of mine, a corporate client that I do coaching with, and she was going to be giving a big presentation, and that what I said to her was, I said, focus on getting your first minute really tight and your last minute. How do you want to open? How do you want to close? Practice that, because everything in the middle is going to fill in. You're an expert on this. You know the journey you want to take people through. You got your structure, but really focus on the first and the last. And that's something that you highlighted there. So practicing that open. What do you recommend for people around a strong opening couple of minutes? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, in NSA, we talk so much about stories and tell a story and this and that. I would like to say a modified story. I don't think we want to begin with a story that is too long, but just walking up in front and instead of just immediately going into the objectives of the day, which often trainers must do. I understand if you're training, you need to get those objectives out pretty quickly. But starting with just a short anecdote that ties in somehow to what the topic is. Now that sounds like that might be hard, but it's really not. You can look at the current events of the day and how that might tie in. There's a lot going on in the world. You can think about just how kind of, your background is plants and how plants grow. That might be a clever way for you to get into the story. Not that you have to use that the whole section, but just, the other day I was looking at my succulents wondering, are you freezing? Well, let's talk a little bit about, and then
Hmm.
getting into so a short anecdote, but it is better than just saying, hi, welcome, let's get started. I guess anybody can do that. That's not terrible, but doesn't give away your personality. One of the stories that I would often use as a shorter anecdote involves sitting next to a prize-winning dog in a cage next to me on a plane. And so that story became a story as I could refer back to it a couple of times throughout the material.
So it sounds like having some stories prepared. You know what the structure of the story, you know the arc of the story, you know the resolution of the story, and if you have some of those in the can, as they say, you can bring them in appropriate times and feel very confident of how am I going to go about telling the story. And maybe that's some of the most important preparation, rather than, like what you said earlier, memorizing line for line all of the words that I'm going to deliver.
Yes, you've got it there. And I think we're most nervous, right? As most research shows, we're most nervous as we're walking to the front and just right before we begin, if people are feeling nervous at all. And so that's where the mind can go, okay, I'm going to start by telling this story about my succulents, or I'm going to start with telling this story. And the first few words that are going to come out, that dog that sat next to me in the plane. And so you've got that down, whether you're not to be too concerned about how it goes over because some audiences may just laugh and find that hilarious, and others may just stare back at you. But it's okay because you're going to move on from that, and it's going to show that you've thought about how you can take your world and make it meaningful for the group.
When you think about that first couple of minutes story, that hitting them with something, is that part of how do I want to say this? I mean, it's easy for us to get focused on the message that we're getting paid to deliver, but it sounds like the first job that we have is building some connection and rapport with the audience. They're probably thinking as we're walking up, is this going to be bad? Am I going to be bored? Should I pay attention? Is that the mission of that first story? What are we trying to do with that opening story?
Establishing authentic self, humor, comfort, caring about the audience. That's important. Did we do a little bit of homework? Not more than a little bit. Did we do our homework on that audience? Do we know some things about them? For example, here's an example that I just used not too long ago in working with a supply chain industry, is showing a picture of a chair. That was my opening slide while I told the story about this chair arrived on time, undamaged, blah, blah, blah. It's your system at work. Boom, into the system. So using just a quick slide or something like that, and not, so what I'm establishing there, I hope, with the showing the slide of the chair I'm sitting in, actually, is this, I care about you. I know what you do. that I know what
Mm-hmm.
to do. And
Mm-hmm.
when you do it right, this is what happens. And isn't that great? And thank you for that. So I think respecting the audience is important too. And that respect comes through listening. That's one thing, Dean, I wanted to bring up today. It's not talked about enough is listening to the group as you're in front of them. What are you getting back? And the really great presenters can do that really well and modify, morph along with that. I think one of the things I learned in national NSA conferences was watching how the main stage speakers adapted to what was, going on in front of them. Maybe paused, maybe moved faster, maybe said, "This is where we're headed next." So really honestly being alert to what's going on with the audience, really listening to their questions, really listening to their comments and then commenting on them. The tricky thing there for the paid professional, as we both are, is keeping the time frame. You got to keep the time frame if you're going to handle that and listen to that and say, I acknowledge that and I'm sure that that can be a concern, blah, 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 is watching where you're headed and letting the audience know where you're headed. This has been a great discussion so far. Let's move forward to see how it ties in with Team XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
good management of time.
Excellent. Well, I'm curious about Cyndi's story. How did you find yourself as a presentation coach, somebody who's focused on how do we build more effective presentations? How did you get there?
I wonder myself sometimes. I was yeah, uh, by quick bio history here. I was a high school teacher fresh out of college. I met a person at a speech tournament where I was coaching speech who said, there's a teacher that I work with who's running a communication business out of his basement. He probably needs some help. Here's his name. I got together with him and worked for another consultant out of his basement for 7 years. Reason I mention this is he was kind of a Columbo kind of type. He did very well selling to manufacturing businesses. And so he brought me in writing my own programs in a lot of customer service skills for the people who work the phones in the manufacturing area. And that's how first programs I wrote. As I got more experienced with that topic, people began to ask for speaking in front of a group. And then that became really most of what I began to do. Like you, I did a lot of training and still would consider myself a trainer because that's what you had to do to move from teaching into working with a corporate world and was kind of in that transition from doing manufacturing company customer service type things to doing presentations kind of happened when I was working for him. But then after those 7 years in starting my own business, that was easy for me to focus on. I also had this acting, the voiceover, commercial acting background that lent itself pretty well into presentation skills because actors and presenters have prep and vocal clarity and all this stuff. So that's how I moved into Present Like a Pro. By the time my first book was called Training from the Heart, written with Barry Lyerly. My second book was It's Your Move, focused on customer service and self-presentation. By the time I got to really focusing more on presentations and Present Like a Pro, I had uh, quite a bit of experience in the field. So that's how I got into doing presentations. And at one point, I'll tell you what I had to keep saying no to. People wanted me to focus on sales presentations. And I had to say, no, I took the files that I had in my file cabinet that I had tried to start on sales presentation and I just threw them out. I know a friend of mine in NSA said, I would have taken those. That no, I'm really not a sales. So, and that's had to be something I've had to learn is say, here's what I work with. I work with influence, yes, but not necessarily how to capture the sale.
That's
So,
wow.
and
That's
I still feel very strongly that way. The group I was mentioning earlier. I was helping them gain influence. Sometimes I'll just work just with women, but not all the time.
Well, it's instructive because it can be hard to say no to things, but recognizing that if I say yes to things that I'm not great at or passionate at or the best at, every time I say yes to something like that, then I'm also saying no to something that I really do want to make a difference with, or the things that I am most impactful with. So that clarity is really important, and I think for any of us at any stage, whether we're getting into speaking or training, it definitely relates to that niche concept of who am I for, and what are the problems that I solve best. And so I
Yes, you
appreciate
put
that
it.
because part of it is, what don't I do?
Yeah, I wish, well, no, I did realize that pretty much earlier because no one likes the feeling of being in front of the group and not feeling right or
Mm,
correct. So,
hmm.
and then that also introduced the book with Kevin on fearless facilitation, which was the last book we wrote together, Fearless Facilitation. So what I do, and you do too, is facilitate and get involvement in a meeting and engage people. And those are another set of skills tied in with presentations. So that's where I figured out, oh, this is what I bring, another thing I bring to the group. And if you're a good trainer, you learn how to do that pretty early on. You got to keep the group engaged.
Yeah, facilitation skills are a great area, I think, for anybody. Not only if you're training, but you find yourself being asked maybe to facilitate a panel or even MC a event. And if that's something you're interested in, those are great skills to be able to have because not everybody can do it. Let's talk here about you've mentioned NSA Illinois, you've mentioned NSA National. What role in your journey has kind of communities like that meant, or what have you found to be the benefit of those types of organizations?
Well, besides just the sheer fun of the conferences and the meetings and meeting people who like to do what you like to do, it helps set up. It's always helped for me to set up where I'm at in the mix. You know, some communications guy, Festinger, talked about of that kind of thing, that we really don't have a good idea where our skills and talents lie in the mix until we get out among people who
Mm,
also do that. And so NSA and NSA Illinois have really helped me be better as a professional and as a speaker. And um, there are not a lot, like there are a lot of organizations around training. There are organizations around human resources. There are organizations around those kinds of things. But there are not a lot of really good ones like NSA and NSA Illinois around speaking. Primarily speaking, yes, we've branched into other things. And I just love that. It reminded me of a big adult speech team. Speech team, and I was on speech team in high school.
mm,
I directed speech team when I taught high school. And I remember going to the first meeting here. I got a paper flyer about this group. It was called Professional Speakers of Illinois. And we were meeting at a hotel near O'Hare, and I'm going to go to that. And I walked in, and it was like this huge adult speech team. Everybody wanted to wanted to compete, and they were just so professional and so kind. So yeah, figuring out where I was in the mix and wanting to be, it was competitive. I wanted to get that CSP. And at the
mhm.
time, our local chapter even had our own little designation we worked toward that, I wanted to get. And so the organization encouraged that.
The you highlighted something there about organizations that not a lot of people focus on or recognize maybe, and that is the helping ourselves answer where do I stand, and not from a necessarily how do I get better than everybody else, but being around an environment to say like where do I stack up and what's the next step I can take to get better. And if I'm not around that, I think about the top pool player in a town of 1,000 people who travels to the big city to a tournament, and realizes I'm not as good as I thought I was. And so getting out there, you have to go out to those experiences to find out where do I stand and how do I get just a little bit better. And the risk can be for some people when they're first exposed to that is they realize, oh my goodness, I'm so far from where I am to where that person is on the stage. I don't know how I'm going to get there. But my encouragement has always been for people, use it as inspiration and find the people that are just a step beyond you, and that's your path to how do you get incrementally a little bit better. Because the person that we see on the big stage, they've been working on this maybe for decades, and so use it as inspiration, not demotivation. Any
No, they
kind of parting thoughts on that topic?
Yeah. Yes, okay. They had I'm thinking of one of the ways I learned through NSA and then NSA Illinois we did this. It was an activity called Meet the Pros. And Meet the Pros, you could sign up for 3 pros in the time frame. Of course, we were all pros, but these pros, I don't know, had more books or more articles were big, back. And so I signed up for Meet the Pros. You could be at a table of 8, and that pro would just spew forth all the things they had done. I was interested in being published. All my books, by the way, are brick and mortar publishers. So that format worked really well for me because it was intimate enough, and I had a personal connection with one person and I think back, I know I wrote thank you notes to some of those people at the time for helping me learn and figure out things in that smaller environment as a part of the larger conference. So that would my closing thought would be yes, organization like NSA and NSA Illinois, find the spot that's comfortable for you, volunteer. That's how you and I are meeting as volunteers to do this today and spread the word. And of course, I was president of the chapter, so I got really involved. But why not? That's another way to meet people and to learn as well. I met my co-authors that way. So get involved and get yourself out in some format. It may not be just sitting in the audience. It might get yourself involved in something that gives you more one-on-one connection that you're looking for.
Yeah, get in as a contributor. That's the best way to build relationships. Cyndi Maxey, this has been great. If people want to get in contact with you or follow the work that you're doing, where would you send them?
I have a website, CyndiMaxey.com, and I also have a spot on LinkedIn. So those are 2 spots that I think would give you the most information in the shortest amount of time. And my phone and email is all there as well.
Awesome. Cyndi, thank you so much for how you've contributed to the improvement of so many presenters and for joining me today for this conversation.
Thank you, Dean, for doing this. Thank you.
Take care.